for all the latest community news and events.
103.2 Preston FM.
Your community, your radio.
103.2 Preston FM. Keeping it local.
And it's your Chat City, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. through to noon. And it's nice to welcome into the studio, once again, Heather Crook and Steve Halliwell. So Happy New Year to you both.
Happy New Year to you.
I think the last time we met was in the YMCA window, Heather. I know you couldn't be with us on that occasion, Steve, but Heather and I enjoyed just sitting in the window, didn't we?
Yeah, it was nice.
And for our listeners, if you don't know, Heather is the author of the Preston Magazine, and it's issue 16 that's out at the moment. She's Penwitham resident, and the magazine is a collection of nostalgia, history and memories about Preston. And again, because we always, and I always think of Steve as a kind of aficionado of pubs in Preston, and I always think it's a nice thing to be. I'd love to be an aficionado of pubs, Steve. I take it that, and we'll be talking to Steve in a few moments. I take it, although your knowledge of the pubs doesn't actually mean that you drank in them all, Steve.
No, but in my youth I did my best to drink in them all. But, no.
Oh, brilliant. So we should be talking to Steve in a moment. And on the front of the magazine there is a beautiful photograph of, is that Penwitham Priory? It says Penwitham Priory. Yeah, the photograph on the front of the magazine.
No, that's St Walburg's.
Is that St Walburg's?
Yeah, it was taken by a man called Marty Hopkirk.
Marty Hopkirk, a local photographer?
Yeah, he lives in Lostercall and he puts his photographs on Flickr.
Right.
On the Preston group.
Wow, because that is a beautiful photograph.
It's a lovely photograph.
And some of the stories in this magazine, Christmas in the Trenches, is that the story that last time we met you were telling me that somebody had sent you information about?
A diary, yeah.
Was it a diary?
Of the great uncle, yes, who, his name's Joshua Kelsall. And he came from Preston and he was in the trenches, and it tells of his time on Christmas Eve when they did take part in exchanging gifts with the Germans.
Right, and that came out of the blue?
Yeah, somebody just wrote to me and said, would I be interested in letting it appear in the magazine, so...
It must be lovely, Heather. And I know I'm always fascinated when we talk about this, the fact that you started the magazine off, and apart from any sponsorship that you get, you've done it all yourself. It's really taken off, hasn't it? Because, I mean, apart from us featuring it on Preston FM, I've seen it on Blog Preston, I've seen it in various places around Preston, I've talked to people who've had a copy of the magazine. It really has taken off,
yes,
this, hasn't it?
It does really well, and I do one in Penwitham, which is the same, and Lostercall, and they get people back together, or people let me use their personal family history to put in the magazine.
And just again, because every time we meet, which I think is monthly at the moment, there's always new listeners. So for listeners who don't know, just tell us how this came about and why. What was it that made you want to put this magazine together?
I'd been saving information about Middleford, where I live in Penwitham, for quite a few years. And my partner wanted a flyer for his business. And then I saw one of these, I think it was a cotton something, where they did all advertisements. And I thought it would be a good way to put my history with the adverts to promote the history of it. The adverts pay for the publication. Yeah. And
people can find them across the city in libraries, in various places?
Yeah, they can get it at the Harris, the Town Hall, tourist information, cafes around town, pubs, newsagents.
Another thing that you have done, and you've been reading each time you've come along to Chat City, you've done excerpts from it. You've been reading the autobiography of your father, in effect, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you're going to do that for us right now, because where are we up to at the moment?
We're up to where a young lady sends him a love letter at school.
Okay. So, and your father's name again, Heather?
Is Arthur Crook.
Okay, off you go.
So he was at the Home for Boys, Ivy Bank in Brocklesview, Preston, during the late 1920s. And he says, the most demoralising thing that ever happened to me at school concerned a female. Our playground was a cobbled space, school buildings on one side and two sides of factory walls, and the fourth, the wall that divided the girls' and infants' playground from the boys. The boys were downstairs and the girls upstairs. At playtime, the lassies sat at the windows and looked down at us boys at play. Of course, we showed off a bit, and the girls would clap at our prowess at whatever we were doing, pretending to fight each other, jumping the furthest, standing on our hands. I fancied one girl, although I'd never spoken to her. Surprise, surprise. One day I received a letter from her. It was some romantic verse, I forget what, just some silly soppy things that girls write. I suppose a dare. Anyway, I was chuffed. Fancy skinny me. I wasn't that well built, but she, Marion Osborne, fancied me. Marion was chubby, had a bonny face, and wore short frocks, which always showed her pants, salmon pink, the same as her frock. Fattish legs with galoshes on. I used to walk home behind her, mouthing nonsensical and trite utterances. If she giggled, I felt quite the lad. Anyway, she had written this missive, and it had been duly delivered by another girl to another boy and given to me. I could hardly eat my dinner till Miss Hall said, "No pudding, Crook, unless you clean your plate," which brought me back down to earth. After dinner, I showed it to Dougie Huxley. 2 heads were better than one on this sort of business. I think Dougie was a bit jealous because he nattered on about only wanting her friend in the reply. Sod off, I said. I wanted to reply in a similar vein. The upshot was we decided to do the usual roses are red, violets are blue bit. I can't remember what tripe I wrote, but it was lovey-dovey. Paper was produced, pencil found, and it was written down in the cellar as we washed ourselves, then folded up in a manner that it stayed closed, and to Marion written on the front. I left Dougie to the cloak and dagger stuff required to get it to its recipient. Marion duly read it, I suppose, showed it to her friends, but there was a traitor in the camp, Mattie Hall, a scruffy black-haired girl who went and told the headmistress, Miss McGraw. The next thing I knew, Daddy Brown called me to his desk and showed me the note I had written. "Never put pen to paper, Crook, in affairs of the heart," he said. He treated it as a joke, laughing whilst he talked to me. "Something still has to be done. McGraw wants to see you upstairs." I was aghast. Go upstairs and walk past 2 classes of girls to reach the headmistress's desk. "I can't do that, sir," I stuttered. "You can and you will, I'm afraid. Not my decision. Miss McGraw insists you go upstairs." "Can't you cane me, sir?" I pleaded. "Afraid not, lad. Off you go." I went out of the class and stood at the bottom of the stone steps that led to the girls' domicile. Eventually I reached the top and knocked. A girl answered the door with an enquiring yes. "I've got to see Miss McGraw," I said hoarsely. "Just a minute," she said. "I'll go and tell her." I think she must have flew. She was back in no time. "Miss McGraw says come in." Please let me die, God, and be a martyr. So I tiptoed so my clogs wouldn't make a noise on the wooden floor. About 50,000 heads turned to look. Well, at least about 60. 2 classes with the headmistress's desk midway between the 2 sets of girls. My face was as red as a fire. I stood in front of this awesome woman and thought, she's worse than Miss Hall. She looked at me for a long minute, then said, "This is your handwriting, I presume?" "Yes, miss," I whispered. She wanted to know my full name and age and where my parents lived. I told her I was at the orphanage. "Oh, you're one of the home lads, are you? I wonder if I should inform whoever is in charge. I could send it via one of the home girls." "Oh, please don't. It was only a bit of fun," I begged. Bit of fun, she said, raising her voice. I suppose 60 pens stayed poised mid-air, awaiting the next words. "You are here to read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest, and if you want to worship anyone, do it in church." I had a wax that the sentiment that I had written about worshipping her, and if you feel lyrically bent, write something more mundane. I wondered what mundane meant. Anyway, young man, we will overlook the deviation of the rules this once and save your sentiments till you leave school. Off you go and tell Mr. Brown that 6 of the best won't come amiss. Thankfully, I retraced my steps past all the laughing eyes of Miss McGraw's pupils. The palms of my hands were wet through, and I hoped I would never have to endure such a harrowing experience ever again. The boys in my class said I deserved a VC. Daddy Brown didn't cane me. To him it was a bit of a laugh. Maybe he had indulged in such fripperies when he had been my age. Needless to say, at playtime there was quite a few grinning faces from the upstairs window whenever I looked up. Marion didn't appear for a couple of weeks and was of rather sober countenance for a while. Meanwhile, things at the orphanage carried on in its monotonous manner. I once had company in my lone bedroom. A retarded boy was mistakenly sent to the home. He was about 8, constantly slavered, could not read or write, could not speak even. He made inarticulate noises and cried himself to sleep the biggest part of the night. The only sentence he could say was, "Anchidi Bokep Sebedets," which he repeated over and over again, and when he was not biting the division between his thumb and forefinger. His name was Dennis Hetchells. Miss Hall sent him to school, but of course it was a waste of time. Thankfully, he only stayed a few weeks. Poor lad needed hospitalising. He had a very large forehead, and Miss Hall said he had water on the brain. It was a relief for me when he went. At night I tried to comfort him at first, but he did not respond, and I found myself shouting at him, which to an older person would have been unwarranted. At 12 years of age or so, one accepts that being healthy, sane and fit, and capable of understanding what the difference between right and wrong is, part of the norm, and we don't realise that having all these attributes we are so lucky and how thankful we should be. Miss Hall never had a good word for anyone who partook of the demon drink. She told us tales about drunken husbands who cause a lot of suffering to their wives and children. At times she kept us hours listening to tales about Manchester Road, Library Street, back of the old church, and the shady denizens who lived there. Starving kids, drunken dads, loose women, and the flea-bitten hovels they lived in. I suppose she had a point. At least we were fed, plain fare of course, but well nourished, a clean bed and clean clothes, and if we were not God-fearing, we ought to have been. Loose women, who she had often told us about, brings about the memory of my first sighting of a lady of the night, or to be more correct in this case, Saturday dinner time. Me and a couple of lads were taking a shortcut through one of the rougher areas of Avenham. We were strolling through a back alley, chattering as young boys do, and kicking a stone backwards and forwards amongst ourselves, when we noticed one of the back gates ajar. And there, leaning over the adjoining wall, with a fag in one hand and shoving chips into her mouth from out of a newspaper, was a rough-looking tart with her frock hoisted up. One gent was buttoning up his trousers, and another eager soul stepping forward to take his turn. She was talking to another woman all over the wall all the time this was taking place, apparently oblivious to the act she was mentally disengaged from. She saw us all staring wide eyes and yelled, "Be off before I charge you for watching, you dirty little buggers." And we ran like the wind and didn't look back till we was 2 streets away.
Oh, dear me.
Sorry.
There we are,
Yeah.
Preston Lad by Arthur Eric Crook, and of course read by his daughter Heather Crook. Wow, it just brings it to life, doesn't it? What would he have thought, do you think, about his life being read on the radio? Would it
It would have been amazed, actually. Yeah, it would have amused him because he liked telling the stories.
Was he a good storyteller?
Yeah, everybody he knew would know that. He'd go to the shop, which was only down the road, and it'd take him 2 hours. He'd talk to everybody.
Is that
way.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the story that you're reading and is written in the magazine, did he write it down, or did he also used to tell you this when you were growing up?
He told us it all when we was kids, and then we used to say to him, "Dad, write it down." And then he started in earnest in his 70s to write it down.
And that's when he put it all down on paper.
He just wrote it on A4 and lined paper, and then about 10 years ago I typed it up.
Right. And I take it the building where the orphanage is no longer here
No,
in
it's
Preston.
still there.
Is it still there?
I've been to look at it. It's down Brocklesview.
Down Brocklesview. That's here in Preston.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the house is called Sunnybank now. It used to be Ivybank and Sunnybank, but now it's just Sunnybank, and you can still see it says Sunnybank.
Wow, that must be quite something, really, from the point of view of memories, you know, the story and knowing that used to be the orphanage.
Where he was, yeah.
And that would have been when? What year would we be talking about there?
When he was in the orphanage, he went in the early 1920s.
In the 1920s. Wow. So there you are. So you need to get a copy of Preston Magazine, and Heather will be back with us to tell us more about her father's story and about the magazine. And I was just saying before we came on air that we just talked to them down at Preston Market, and in this magazine there's a photograph, Preston Market circa 1950s, and it's a photo taken around the mid-50s of Catherine Walker, known to all as Peggy, with a customer when she used to have a chicken stall on the outdoor market in Preston. The stall Walker's was at Orchard Street, end of the big market, and her mother told her that she had a stall selling flowers, which she grew herself, and this was in front of the old public hall at the bottom of Loon Street. It is fascinating stuff, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It is
and people will just
stuff.
email me things or send them through the post and say, is this any good? Yeah.
And have you been surprised by that, Heather, since you started this, the kind of contact that you're getting from people and
how
the
much
things that
people
people are
share.
sending through?
I even found a gentleman on the internet who's from New Zealand, and he grew up in Preston. He's 85 now, and he went to Shepherd Street Mission, and next month his story will appear in the magazine.
Right. And the one in this one about the trenches, that really must have been something when you received that diary, you got the diary through. Cause
to be able to.
It had been hidden for all those years or in a drawer, nobody had read it.
No.
But now again, history's recreated, it's brought to life, and people can read the story.
Yeah, and spurred on by that, another lady called Rita Finley, who lives in Fulwood, has sent me her Uncle Jimmy's diary. And he also tells of his time during the First World War.
Wow. Which otherwise, again, a diary that would have been lost.
Yeah,
this is a story that would have been
read,
lost, but now it's, wow.
It's really good.
Fascinating. There we are. So that's Heather, and we've also got Steve in. He's changed. So, Steve, a very good morning. Our local historian. It's nice to see you again. And I'm not seen you for a while, so what's new in your world of the history of pubs here in Preston?
Well, as far as the history of the pubs is concerned, I'm working on what will hopefully result in a book later on in the year. That's being worked on as we speak. So watch this space as far as that's concerned. But just following on from Heather's remark about the diaries from the trenches, of course, 1914 is now it's now the centenary,
that's
and of course there's a lot more interest being shown, not only in the First World War, but history in general. And for anybody who would like to learn more about particularly local history, they might do worse than go along to the Preston Historical Society.
Yes, yeah.
Who this coming Monday they meet monthly, and it's the first Monday of the month. So this coming Monday, they've got David Hunt, who is a well-known local historian, and he's going to be speaking about the Horrockses of Preston, the greatest name in cotton.
Right.
So that will be a full house.
Is it at the Minster?
It's at the Minster at 7:30. Non-members can pay £2.50 on the door, and they've been getting in excess of 200.
I believe
people
I
at the
saw
meetings.
photographs of all the people who were there.
So get yourself along and partake of that one, because as I say, there'll be a full house.
And what is the oldest pub then that we still have in Preston then?
Well, the Blue Bell on Church Street, I would think, is the oldest one. 1716 we have a record.
1716?
Yeah, when the landlady was fined for keeping a bawdy house.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And the bawdy house would have been far too much drink and whatever in those days.
Oh,
much more.
It could be much more, as Heather's just outlined.
That's right, yes, very nicely there. And, I mean, what about the Black Bull? How old is the Black Bull here?
Well, the Black Bull is probably a more recent building. Undoubtedly there was another Black Bull on the same site. But information about it is pretty scarce. Funnily enough, I have an article in next week's Lancashire Evening Post about the Black Horse, just across the road from the Black Bull.
Right.
And similarly, the building we see today is 1896, I think. But it goes back at least 100 years before then. I've found evidence of a previous Black Bull, or as it was called, the Black Bull and the Black Horse and Rainbow. So I think that goes back to 1797.
Right.
That won't be the earliest date. So still lots of pieces to find in this jigsaw we're making.
That's right, and that's what's fascinating. And I mean, the pubs the pubs of those years and a century ago, whatever. What about the names of the pubs? Were the names important to the pub? Did the names have any special particular meaning?
The origin of pub signs goes back to the time when people couldn't read, or the vast majority of the population couldn't read, but they knew what a Black Bull looked like, or a Black Horse. Or, funnily enough, we're in Cannon Street at the moment. At the top of Cannon Street, right across the road, were two public houses next door to one another. The Borough Tavern, which had a lamb over the door as recognition of the borough logo. And right next door to that was the Grey Horse and Seven Stars. The Grey Horse and Seven Stars had previously been known as the White Horse and Seven Stars. However, the popular myth, if it is a myth, is that the White Horse sign, with the grime and dirt of the 18th and 19th century, changed to a greyish colour.
Right.
So rather than paint the horse again, they changed the name to the Grey Horse and Seven Stars.
Right.
Myth or not myth?
Oh, that's
interesting.
Me. That's fascinating. And when did the decline in the pubs begin in Preston? Was it modernisation, regeneration, or changes in drinking patterns?
Well, I think there's an awful lot of a mixture there, each in the turn. Just before the war, Second World War, it was said that there were 365 pubs in Preston.
Wow. One
for every day of the year. I've often questioned what happened in a leap year, but
they have built another one.
Have a day off. So the decline really has been since then. And there's probably a mixture of reasons, many of which I don't know. I mean, an awful lot disappeared in the post-war renovations of dilapidated areas, places like North Road, Lancaster Road, Ribbleton Lane, all underwent Adelphi, Moor Lane. All underwent serious demolition work, and of course a lot of the pubs disappeared at the same time and never reappeared.
Right.
And I suppose for the breweries it was a question of economy. They would like to polarise it into fewer premises. And same amount of beer consumed, but more economically to the brewery.
Right. Well, people can read. Is it this Saturday? Your
No, every Wednesday.
Is it
every
Wednesday?
In the retro section, there's a full page.
And the next one is
and
this
the next
Wednesday.
one is this coming Wednesday. It's the Black Horse on Friargate, and I think it's number 24 in the series.
Right.
So,
oh, lovely. And so with yours and with Heather's. And a nice way of bringing this all together, we keep trying to find Prestonians around the world, and we have people who contact us. And they love knowing, about the stories and about the history of Preston, because they say it keeps them in touch with Preston. There was somebody from Ireland last week and somebody the Isle of Man, and we've had somebody in New York. And this is a lovely way of them keeping in touch with Preston and through yourselves of bringing it all alive. So it's really nice. So I shall look forward to your next visit to Chat City.
Yes, next
so I'll see you soon again then, Heather and Steve. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for having us here.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed today's interview, why not tweet Huey at ChatCityPFM.